So the weekly dinners of a old chef and his three daughters are soon changed by their different life events and stuff. That's basically the story of Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, remade as a Tortilla Soup. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Cheers.
This time around, the question that I started thinking about was, it's been, like, believe it or not, over a year now since we've started doing these and stuff. What is it that kind of really surprised you out of all these over like kind of the course of all these different remakes and originals that we've been watching and stuff? Is there anything that's kind of like, really made you kind of go, yeah, I didn't really expect that and stuff?
I don't know. Well, maybe it's difficult to think of that off the top of my head as something that's surprising, but something that has occurred to me is the difference between watching movies with subtitles and watching movies without subtitles. I find myself, and I think this is a product of you being able to use your own imagination more when you're reading. But I think I kind of imbue movies with subtitles with a little bit more credit and artistic merit than I would if they weren't with subtitles. Because I think in the process of reading it and watching the performance, you actually, you add your own kind of interpretation a little bit to the movie.
Interesting.
And yeah, I think it's one of those things where maybe this is why you find a lot of sort of foreign movies, people go, oh, it's terribly amazing. And then when you do it in an exact like-for-like remake in an English language version, it doesn't have quite the sort of, the depth that you would feel. And I wonder if it's really a product of us, filling in those gaps,
right?
Or if the original is actually good. I mean, I guess the way to test it would be to watch the English version with subtitles as well and see. I mean, I actually kind of did that with this movie, and I still ended up vastly preferring the original. But still, it's an interesting way of looking at this, though. How about you?
Right. Yeah, for me, like we've seen so many now, and it's, to me, like, I guess I'm fascinated by it, like how, despite the fact that like we've seen so many kind of repeated patterns and stuff, it's still like interesting, like kind of just, like I've seen some of these movies before and stuff like that, and then just watching them with the lens of like comparing it with the remakes and stuff is a different way to watch these movies. Like, so, this being today's discussion being in a case in point, I'd seen like, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, like, just a few years after it was out and stuff like that. And watching it now, like, so this time around, I watched the Tortilla Soup first, actually, and then I went back. And so it was interesting for me to see what things that, like, the remake kind of, translated, so to speak, and then what's things that, like, really didn't translate as well and everything. So so I think it's kind of just really fascinating to me to kind of like, even go back to some of these movies that I've seen before and just to have this different lens to watch it and stuff.
Yeah, I think as well, we've also started to develop a kind of a shorthand for the sort of the general kind of things that we see in these remakes, in that, there's going to be a kind of an MTV effect where there's just sort of more beautiful people in the remakes. They're going to be, it's going to be more kind of, there's more exposition. They'll probably sort of like fill in the gaps to, so that the stupider people in the audience will get all the plot points and things like this. So yeah, or they'll just treat the audience that way, I would say. And of course the effects will get more expensive and various other things like this. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happens all the time. And I guess it's just, you get used to that eventually. We probably don't even discuss that really much anymore in these videos because we're so used to seeing it now. But yeah, I mean, I also watching them in which order you watch them is quite interesting as well.
Yeah,
it really does change your perception. Obviously, whichever one you watch first, you tend to, think, oh well, that's pretty good, and whatever one you watch second. But I mean, that's not always the case, though. I would say it's you can actually perhaps appreciate the finer details, the subtleties, maybe in the original, if it's a better movie, of course, which is most of the time. But yeah. Yeah, it's definitely still an interesting process to go through.
Definitely.
And we've been through quite a few.
Oh, yes. So in this one, this is actually the third of the what they called the Father Knows Best series for Ang Lee. Ang Lee, this is way before like being involved with the Marvel universe and like even Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, stuff like that. He was making these movies that were fairly low budget. I mean, like it's a decent sized budget, but it's like actually like I want to say that like most of them were like around at the most like a few million, stuff like that. And the thing that strikes me is that like he has a real way of like kind of looking closely at the characters and kind of really diving into their lives, but it's done in such a way though that like in this case the food is actually like the thing that kind of ties the people together. It's interesting how like the food is like almost like this kind of language that is like spoken, like we see it from the very beginning where we see old Chu going through this process of cooking and stuff like that, and it's kind of like just almost like you're feeling like this is like a journal of him and like not only his cooking experiences and stuff, but he's like kind of also like telling the story of like where his life is at now and stuff like that through the food.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a very interesting. Certainly, the opening sequence does that to great effect, and it made me kind of think a little bit about other movies that have food connotations, like Water for Chocolate and various other movies. Yeah. And there was this, you haven't really had those for a while, and there's not any that I can think of off the top of my head, and I can tell you why that is. That's because they've been replaced by Instagram. Like this is food porn before it was a thing, and there is, I mean, it is fascinating watching the opening sequence because you get to see all the process, and some of it is the sort of quite gory process of like, gutting a fish, and, he does this weird thing where he blows the head of a goose to expand it and all this kind of stuff. There's a sort of very odd stuff, but I mean, fascinating to watch, but it is exactly the same kind of appeal that you get with people icing cakes. Well, I suppose it's been replaced by kind of, Cake Boss and all these sort of things now on reality TV, or the Great British Bake Off if you're in England. So
and this is actually I think before Food Network really took off. Like it was probably right around the 90s that all of a sudden we had this phenomenon with celebrity chefs, right? Like that was just something that like I don't think we really ever had that before. Like kind of where the Anthony Bourdains, the Guy Fieri's, the Rachel Ray's, and stuff like that. I mean that was just something that kind of took off right around like after this time period and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it was very very auspicious for Ang Lee to pick up on that and sort of say that it's fascinating watching people make food. Just like I think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is as much about, it's more just about landscapes and martial arts. You don't really even have to pay attention to the movie because it's so beautifully shot, and there's just so much sort of interesting balletic martial arts going on. So he's a very visual director in that respect, and that's very obvious in this. So
definitely. And the thing that we see, of course, is like through these weekly meals, the family's kind of connecting through the food, and it's actually interesting how like it really kind of is like a notation for the passage of time with the family, stuff like that, because each week there's like a whole huge banquet. I mean I gotta tell you that like the stuff he's doing, granted like we saw like him being called into like kind of this palace, right, of a restaurant and stuff, and that's the scale that he's used to, and I think even like the daughter said something about like that was how she learned, and then so like when she was cooking for the boyfriend, right, she's cooking like this massive spread just even for the two of them and everything, so there's really no sandwiches with chips for these folks.
No, feel quite guilty making my daughter's lunch in the morning after watching this. And that's what you think, there's so much kind of, he's preparing so much food for this Sunday meal that you can't help but just feel that all of the children are just hopelessly and grateful for the meal, because
yeah, I was gonna say,
I think if someone did this for me every Sunday, I'd just be round there, every week. And yeah, and it's very interesting to see, because you see so much effort that goes into it. But
yeah,
when that's your everyday, it becomes more normal.
Right.
I suppose it's true of any person who has any profession that crosses over with home life. You can, someone who's a construction guy will probably just build an entire extension on the house over a period of a year and think nothing of it. But yeah, I mean, it's very sort of lovingly shot, and you're right in terms of, it's an interesting point you made there with the passage of time, because time doesn't necessarily flow completely linearly in this movie.
No.
There are sometimes gaps of several weeks, months, and they're all everything is, like, as you said, each event is punctuated by the dinner, and these are our the only times we see what the decisions and the impact of the different characters' choices has on their lives, or on the lives of the family as a whole, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
but I think it's sorry, go on, man.
Oh no, I was gonna say, it's interesting how, like, the dinners are like when they make the announcements of what happened and stuff, like those decisions and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of an interesting take on, this is a single father who's obviously, very wrapped up in his work, which they sort of established by having him going into this enormous restaurant. And you get the impression that he hasn't really gone to any great lengths to build big relationships, or certainly at that point in his life, there's no kind of real strong relationships with any of his daughters. You get some of the characters sort of saying, oh, back when we were younger, he was like this and he was like that, and that's not how reality is for them now. But I mean, it's this whole thing of our relationship within our families and what we hold back from people, especially our parents, because every dinner there's an announcement, and each character has their own kind of secret, duplicitous sort of thing going on, which all comes out at the dinner.
Right.
So it's kind of, the dinner is where all of the family truths get aired, basically.
And then, typically afterwards, like, it's not, like, kind of, what's called, that they aren't discussing. It's just like, okay, the decision's been made and stuff, and oh, by the way, I'm pregnant, oh, by the way, I'm married now, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the impression you get is the eldest daughter, Jia Chen, I want to say, you get the feeling that because of what's happened to her, that has actually established this pattern of no one really discussing anything up front with the father, and only sort of announcing it at the dinner, because they can see that she wanted to become a cook and was, heavily guided away from that, and wanted to do something, he wanted something more financially lucrative for her as a career. And so I think because of that's what's happened to her, that the other daughters aren't necessarily willing to kind of share their wants, needs, and everything else with him. So
yeah, it's interesting how she's the one that ends up with the house and stuff. And like, kind of like the movie opens up with the father and everything like that, and but then it closes with her, like, kind of being like kind of the remaining, I guess, person living in there, and then you really see, like, kind of the isolation, or like kind of where like kind of the other rooms are darkened and stuff like that, other than where like she's cooking and where they're going to eat and stuff like that. And so it's like almost like that as time's gone on, like it went from this kind of full house in daylight, and then, like, the night kind of really, the darkness kind of really accentuates the fact that, like, this is what's left of what used to be a home and stuff. Now it's just like a place where she's staying at until she heads off to Amsterdam and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly from Chu's perspective, it's a story of transition, because he's lost his wife years ago, and he's obviously had to sort of struggle through this. He's gradually losing his daughters one after the other. He loses his best. Again, spoiler alert to anyone who's watching this. Right. We always say that, massive spoilers in these. He loses his friend. He's obviously already his career is obviously already pretty much wound down. He makes the announcement right at the end that he's kind of selling the house, and you think kind of, well, this is it, but actually it's kind of like a transformation, and he's all the stuff that you think has you're worried about him, the daughter's worried about him, is actually him trying to like start a new chapter, which is really interesting. And he's a very kind of stoic, quiet character, so you don't really know. You judge him by mostly his actions in the movie rather than his dialogue. So and
it's funny how like a really big spoiler is like kind of to like that, like you said, we thought that he's winding down, but here he is like starting a new family. Literally like not only getting married, but he's like, he got busy, like within no time at all, like his new wife is now expecting as well and stuff, and that came as a surprise. I mean, that's actually something I've forgotten from the first watch and stuff. It'll be interesting kind of to talk about like how they handled that in the remake and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just that thing that like like you said, on the surface it seems like that like things are becoming more quiet for him, and like in fact that's the other thing we think about with somebody quote unquote retiring and stuff, is that like then they are settling down, they're kind of maybe like going to play golf or kind of some kind of hobby and stuff. But here's this old gentleman who like he's like ready to have like another kid, and yeah. He's not done yet.
I mean, it was really clever the way he continually raised the stakes for Chu's character, in that you see him losing all this stuff. You see him worried about his health, and he's jogging and everything else, and you just think, oh man, something. And then when he's drinking away at the end, you just think, oh, this is like the moment of crisis. He's going to sort of break down or something, and then he completely sort of subverts your expectations with the announcement. But you kind of knew it would be too obvious for Mrs. Liang to be the announcement. It had to be something else. But yeah, I mean, the way they sort of build that up, and it's also, I think what's interesting is seeing the effect on the eldest daughter, because she's obviously built up all this worry, and it's funny, through the events she can see what's happening, and you feel that even though her direct dialogue and conversation is very confrontational, through the event, she's the only one that's there at the friend's death. She is kind of there, always in the background for him. And it's really when all of that gets announced and she realizes there's nothing to worry about, you get this kind of real feeling of hollowness. Like she's kind of, well, I did this whole career that you wanted me to do. I put all that on hold, and, I was worried about you, and there was no need for that either. It's kind of, you feel this kind of, I felt quite sorry for her in the end, because I just felt like she's kind of, wasted quite a lot of her life.
Yeah, it's funny how, she had like initially, like turned down the Amsterdam, what's called position, because she, was saying like, oh, I got to stay with my father and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, then, like you said, he totally subverts that. And then the other thing I think that's kind of along that lines is how, even like the boyfriend, the kind of like, basically she was turning to, like, whenever, like, things were getting really hard for her and stuff like that. Again, like, basically like, when it came down to it, like he was like, oh, I gotta tell you, like, like, it's funny how like this movie does this, where like these announcements, right? So he's like, oh, I'm getting married and stuff like that. But he still had the kind of like, gumption or nerve to kind of say, oh, but like there's a room in the back, and we can have one more quickie, I guess, before and it's just kind of really, I think, I feel like in some ways what that is all about with her is that, like, pretty much people, like she had probably higher expectations for herself, and then in the end people were kind of like, like just treating her like, like, oh, well, Jia Chen is the one that kind of, like, she'll always be there for me and stuff like that, and like I can count on her and stuff.
Well, I think it's this sort of thing where people looked at her like that she's so self-absorbed, and you hear that from the other sisters as well, that people don't really worry about her or what's going on, because they just think, oh, well, she's so driven and she's so focused and so wrapped up in her own world. But actually she's quite a complicated character, because really she's actually spent most of her life in service of her father, really.
Mm.
And when all of that comes sort of tumbling down, there's not a lot left really, except for, of course, the cooking, which is, we've established, is her sort of, you know, one true sort of passion and her real connection to her father, I would say.
Yeah, I mean that is interesting how like that's like probably the one thing that like really tied them, you know, because as a kid she used to, you know, watch her and old one and stuff like that, and you know, like she was like kind of the kid hanging out and just, you know, absorbing, you know, kind of the her father's world and stuff.
And I thought it was very interesting, this whole idea, the symbolism of the loss of taste of the father, because what you tend to see is you tend to see the daughters' lives in sort of chaos, and they're all kind of trying to find their way through it. And whilst this is going on, he's kind of worried about his health. He's losing his taste. He can't kind of like judge what he's actually cooking anymore. And then, you know, right at the end, you have this reconciliation with the daughter where it's almost like he realizes he's pushed her down the wrong avenue her entire life. And now she's actually regained her sort of passion for cooking. It allows him to sort of actually connect properly with her, and he regains his taste. It's almost like he's now regained that original relationship with her, which is kind of how I saw that, the way they use that in the movie.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how like we also see a lot of the you know, the life of, you know, the people in, you know, their world and stuff like that, where this is like kind of, to be honest, like I, you know, actually was born in Taiwan and stuff like that, but this is like many years afterwards, and there's a lot of ways that like, you know, things that I probably couldn't even imagine, like kind of, you know, like part of it was like, you know, we see somewhat the Western influence and stuff like that.
Wendy's.
Yeah. And, you know, I wonder if they got a product placement deal on that one and stuff.
Right, yeah.
So it's interesting how like the, you know, just the sea of people. I mean, I remember that, you know, Taipei and Taiwan, you know, like kind of was pretty like, you know, dense in population, but you really just see that like kind of, and then on top of that, you know, the other parts of the life is like, you know, in the school with the one daughter teaching and stuff like that. You know, I don't really remember that all the kids, you know, the students being like in, you know, basically military uniform, although it's Taiwan's one of those countries that has mandatory military service unless you get entrance into a university and stuff, and which, you know, kind of, there's only so many slots, you know, available for that as well. So I want to say that like Ang Lee himself, like kind of, he went through that. I want to say, you know, I seem to kind of remember reading somewhere that happened. Yeah. So he actually ended up going to an American university after serving and stuff like that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I was going to say, actually, the whole structure of the film does feel quite Western. It felt very familiar compared to, say, some of the Japanese movies we've watched lately. He has there's definitely a kind of a Western sensibility about, I would say, about how he does actually tell a story. Maybe not with all the details at all, but yeah.
It's interesting how afterwards he like was really called on to do like a lot of Western, you know, because I think the next movie he did was Sense and Sensibility, you know, like talk about Western, right? You know, and you know, it just from there he just kind of was just. I don't think he's, you know, he did Crouching Tiger sometime after that, like, you know, like kind of, I guess 99 was it, thereabouts. But yeah, like, you know, but other than that, like, you know, Brokeback Mountain, The Hulk, of course, just, you know, on and on, like lots of, you know, very Western movies and stuff. So
yeah. So how old were you when you were in Taipei then?
Oh, this was like when I was a kid. It was like, you know, like till about 6 and stuff when we came to this country. So yeah, so I kind of have very vague memories, you know.
I'm sure.
But I do remember the drying wet season. So that monsoon kind of we see in the movie, that's definitely very much a characteristic of you know, the climate there. But then also the food, like, you know, so that's one thing I do really remember as a kid, even and stuff like just, you know, like where I can remember a few meals that we had, you know, like kind of as family and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, I remember lots of these banquets, like kind of, you know, these lavish kind of, you know, because like anytime somebody got married, there was a banquet. Anytime that like, you know, something, you know, big celebration or so whatever was a banquet. And so like, I just do remember like kind of these big elaborate meals. And that's kind of very much a part of the culture as well. That like, because I think the one dinner that Chu got called to rescue was something for like a governor or some kind of official or something like
Yeah.
that. So it seemed like it was just something that like, you know, maybe like, you know, they were celebrating some kind of, you know, achievement or something like that. And, you know, so these banquets is definitely such a key part of kind of, you know, any kind of major event and stuff like that for the people and stuff.
Yeah, I have to say I came away from it very hungry watching this movie.
Yeah, I should have warned you not to watch an empty stomach.
It's it does look pretty great, most of it. I think it was only just the weird incident with the goose that kind of slightly put me off. But apart from that, it was it looked really great.
So the deal with that is that like apparently you know, part of the whole thing with roasting it so the skin is like super crispy is to have air underneath the skin. So that's like kind of, you know, that is a real thing that they do and everything. But although they don't typically blow it through the, you know, the mouth and stuff, they usually take a straw and like kind of they puncture like a little hole. So, but I guess he didn't even want a hole in the skin, so you know he had to like kind of do it like, I don't know, the crafty way, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, it was full on. Yeah, that was another secret love story going on there. But yeah, no, it's fascinating to watch anyway.
I think the one other thing that was even striking for me, you know, in terms of the culture was I'd known of like these mausoleums and stuff like that, but seeing like kind of, you know, them carrying like, you know, the ashes through like these walls of lockers and everything. I'd never seen anything like that before, you know, to be honest, until I saw this movie. And, you know, that was something that like kind of, you know, I wasn't even aware of it. But again, I think part of that is a feature of the fact that like here you have this small island, you know, densely populated.
Yeah.
So you can't afford to waste space, I guess, for, you know, burial plots and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I mean, England's obviously bigger, but still, I mean, you know, burial plot space is very, very tight over there. Yeah, it was quite interesting to see. I'd never seen anything like that either until I'd watched this movie, to be honest. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. Did you feel like there was kind of a tension between tradition and maybe sort of an encroachment of Western values or lifestyle between the father and the daughters?
Yeah,
I think that was kind of
and I think that would be interesting to kind of talk about also with the remake and stuff, that like I just didn't really see that as being a central issue. Like, you know, even though we did see the Wendy's and stuff like that, but I didn't feel like, you know, like there was almost like this sense of like that, almost like a bubble that they had where a lot of, you know, like kind of the old ways, so to speak, were really preserved through the food and through the way they were like kind of, you know, just even like with each other, stuff like that. Like just even the one, you know, kind of, you know, the friend who then ends up being, you know, the father's wife or stuff like that. She was like kind of, you know, hang out with one of the daughters, and, you know, kind of that is a very traditional thing of like kind of that the people kind of, you know, they would like eat like, you know, watermelon seeds. So like it seems like a strange thing to eat, but, you know, like apparently like they would dry these large watermelon seeds, not the little ones, right, mind you. It just like these huge, you know, like kind of ones that then there would be like a little bit of a kernel inside. But it was just different times. It's like one of those kind of funny things that like is a very Taiwanese kind of thing that like you know, that you would just, when you're hanging out, you would kind of snack on something like this, you know, and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of, I mean, from what we've watched with the Japanese movies, it always seems to be, it's framed in a way of almost like conflict, I would say. And in this, it seemed very casual, the way, you know, there was no sort of, it wasn't, you know, framed or portrayed in a way that was causing any sort of great upheaval or conflict between older generations or newer generations, in my mind anyway.
Right. Yeah.
It was much more the personal relationships was the main focus, I would say.
Yeah, there wasn't like this sense of like, being threatened by like a, some kind of influence and stuff. And I think it has to do with like that, Japan just until, the Dutch and the, Portuguese and, like kind of, and then ultimately the English, kind of started coming, and, introducing the things that like, is portrayed in actually Last Samurai and stuff like that, that it just wasn't a thing, that they were very insular, and they, kind of proud and stuff like that about the culture. But they didn't really feel at all like kind of, that there was any threat to it until all of a sudden these outside influences start showing up at the door saying, like, hey, we want to trade with you and stuff like that. And then I think, like kind of when they started seeing like how not only, these other foreign influences were happening, but then how it affected the people and stuff, because the Japanese people started kind of dressing, Western style and stuff like that, that then they really kind of, there's a backlash to that. And, for Taiwan, I think it was, it just, I think they, even long before that, just always saw that like, that they, were just always embracing kind of other ideas and stuff like that. Because Taiwan as a country, like the history of it just, really quickly is that like, after like, the communists was taking over China, the nationalists needed somewhere to kind of escape to, right? So they picked this island that, like kind of was mostly, where indigenous kind of native people were living and stuff like that. And some, like kind of, expats, live. But, like, other than that, they were like kind of, well, where else are we going to go? So I think, for the most part, as a country, they just like, for them, it was just a matter of like that they were already, kind of outsiders, I guess, so to speak, kind of, moving into this country. Yeah. So for them, it wasn't like a threat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm be honest, I'm not know a huge amount about the history of Taiwan, but I mean, because obviously, when the communists came in, they eradicated a lot of the traditional sort of religion. Did a lot of that religion actually sort of like carry on in Taiwan?
Yeah, so it's interesting how I'd say probably because that before like the like kind of all that happened with the communists and all that, this was a country that like they kind of the natives, I guess, so to speak, were like kind of had their traditions and everything like that. It was like kind of very much they didn't really have like anything formal per se. And so I think again, just kind of like how we're different cultures isn't really seen as a threat. Christianity kind of really like started taking root in Taiwan strongly, because like my grandmother, she was like a devout Christian. And, I would say that like before that, like kind of before going to Taiwan, she was probably just some mix of like kind of, the traditional values and stuff like that. And like, maybe a little bit, like Taoist or, like kind of Confucius in terms of beliefs and stuff like that, but not really like a religion. But for some reason, like, like I think the influence of like, the missionaries, whatever, that went to Taiwan, they really just like kind of gave it a solid foundation, because I think part of it was like kind of almost like anything the communists was kind of quote unquote bad. So, here was this religion, right, that was kind of like, the opposite of the atheist kind of beliefs of the communists. So, let's have at it, I think, is kind of the attitude. That seems to be like kind of, if I had to describe like kind of, the attitude, so to speak. I can't say for sure, like kind of, beyond that. I don't know actually why like Christianity was so strong in Taiwan, but we see it with the one daughter too. Like,
I was going to say it's very strongly featured in this, and it's the daughter. She's seen as a very devout Christian, and she hasn't. I mean, as it turns out, she has never really had a boyfriend,
right? And
which is again her kind of secret that she brings to the table. Right. Or doesn't actually, but it kind of just comes out in the wash. But that for me was very interesting, because I didn't even realize there would be devout Christians like that in Taiwan. So that was really fascinating. And she's you know, the other people's attitudes towards it, I don't know how reflective that is of Christianity in general. It's kind of, it seems to be sort of accepted but seen as a bit eccentric, really, would be the kind of interpretation I would put on how they portray it.
Because, you know, like they never talked about any of them, you know, any of the rest of them going to church, right, and stuff, and we don't see any of the rest of them having it. So I feel like, yeah, it's kind of, you know, generally treated that way, that like you have like the devout Christians, and then you have like the rest of who are just like kind of almost like indifferent, to be honest, you know, about they're like, they wouldn't say like they're against Christianity, but they're also like, they're not as fanatical, I guess. It's like kind of, it seems like kind of just, and to be honest, that's, you know, probably in some ways like that, you know, people probably viewed my grandmother and stuff, because she was very fanatical. Like kind of, she like, you know, would, you know, anytime she saw me, or anytime like, you know, over the phone, was always like, oh, did you read the Bible today? And, you know, did you go to church this Sunday? You know, like kind of, you know, yeah, all the time. Like, it was very, you know, hardcore.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I'm guessing that can't be that uncommon, because you know, that's obviously something Ang Lee had experienced, because he put it all into that character, even to the fact where she's singing, you know, choral songs and blasting out of her stereo because she can't stand the music that the other people are playing, and so that was pretty interesting, actually, and as we'll see with Tortilla Soup, very hard to translate to a different setting. So it's very, very specific to the location, I would say, that one.
Right. I think just like the one other thing with the other daughters, I guess, so to speak, was the youngest, right? It's interesting how she's the one that initially like kind of very casual about like kind of relationship stuff, but she's the first one that kind of, you know, like, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant, you know, kind of, and yeah, we're getting married and stuff. And
yeah, no, I mean, it's great the way it subverts your expectation. You think the eldest one is going to be the one to move out because she's got the apartment, and then, you know, the whole thing just reverses. And even though the youngest one's complaining about it, she's the first one to go, and not only first one to go, but first one to get pregnant. So, you know, that was quite something. But yeah, it's. I mean, I just found it interesting the way that every one of these things was an announcement, and a very formal announcement at the dinner table. It was just like, you know, they'd eaten, and then it was just like, by the way. So yeah, it was. I mean, that was quite good. It added to the whole sort of humor of the whole movie, really.
And you know, like probably the biggest though was still like kind of the one we talked about already though, like where you know, like kind of Chu himself, like it felt like very much like a Shakespearean comedy where, like, you know, there was this big reveal, right, and then all of a sudden like it all came out that like you know, what it was really all about all along and stuff like that, and all the mistaken kind of identities and all the different misunderstandings and stuff, because, you know, like you said, the belief though with him was that like he was going to the doctor because his health was failing and he was like struggling and stuff like that, but instead he's actually quite healthy and you know, like kind of you know, just ready to, you know, kind of for that next chapter.
Yeah, it does have this kind of comedy of errors, Midsummer Night's Dream kind of quality to it that's really kind of quite nice to watch. Very sort of gentle kind of comedy, really, I would say. But also, you know, punctuated with some really sort of poignant moments as well. Absolutely. You know, I found the fact that, you know, the Christian daughter, Jia Chen, I want to say, you know, the fact that she's kept this secret from all of her sort of siblings for so long is, you know, you really feel that weight on her. And, you know, this real kind of confusion and crisis. Again, it's like the older daughter sort of in a place where she's sort of cast adrift and doesn't really know what's going on, either with her father or with her siblings, was really interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's I think, you know, overall, like kind of, you know, we talked before about the idea of loops and stuff, and then you know, on the one hand, like kind of the weekly meals was like kind of this ritual of like kind of elaborate kind of, food that was different every time. But overall though, it was like this kind of loop that they were all on that, like kind of, and it's interesting how then, as these different things happened, like kind of the loops kind of got disrupted because, this daughter left, and then, like kind of that daughter left. And then so like that, one last meal, I guess, so to speak, last big meal was like the last time they were going to be together the same way, because like things had kind of really, almost like, started being kind of tearing different directions for their lives and stuff, that they weren't going to have these regular, Sunday meals and stuff that the way they were up to, all these changes and stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was, there was a weird sort of sense of relief and also panic, that was portrayed very well by Chu at the end there. So.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, it's this great performance by the woman who played Mrs. Liang as well, because she's really, the person who sort of says the most sort of embarrassing things at any given opportunity, given half the chance, and it's kind of insufferable. Yeah,
and Chu kind of quietly just kind of like nodding or kind of going along with it. Meanwhile, it's I think that's partially the irony of it, is that like, of course with the reveal, like kind of that like he wasn't like kind of agreeing, like he was just nodding just to nod and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So is that a good segue point to go on to Tortilla Soup, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. So here we kind of have like the Spanglish version of the story, of course. And, once again, food's a key character as well. And I think that they did a really good job of like kind of, showing things with the Latino, kind of food that, I hadn't seen before. I kind of was familiar with some of the things, but it's interesting how, until like living, kind of near East LA, for me, Mexican food was Taco Bell and stuff like that. And so it's interesting how like, a movie like this really opens up your eyes to the fact that like, there's a lot more to the richness of their culture and stuff. But at the same time, one thing that they added as a layer that we didn't have actually before with Shall We Dance is that, like when they translated things into the American version, we didn't really see like kind of, the issue of culture. Like they almost stripped away, the issue of culture. But here they added a layer of culture, whereas like the Latino versus American, like different times, the father, played by Hector Elizondo, says like, oh, English or, Spanish, kind of one or the other.
Yeah, it's interesting how they sort of switched between in a few scenes there.
Right.
And I think that was an interesting choice for the father, because with his very good friend, who you get the impression he's one of the few people left that's really, really close to him, you see that whole conversation transpire in Spanish. Right. Whereas, a lot of the stuff with the daughters, who are the people he's supposed to be closest with, is all in English. Which is also kind of an interesting thing. You kind of wonder what is this sort of slightly distant family dynamic where he's talking to all of his daughters, who I'm sure all speak Spanish, but it's all in English. And I think that kind of feeds into this idea of him wanting the best opportunity. Maybe he's forcing them to speak English like he does with the eldest daughter, to try and make sure that she follows her career, or that's the kind of they get that some ingrained kind of practice, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean that is an interesting kind of take of how different times like the native tongue can be like a way that like of intimacy that doesn't really happen like kind of when you just have like kind of one language and stuff like that. And one thing that like I don't know how much I don't think they really showed it so much in this movie, but different times like people would like growing up in a bilingual family, stuff like that. I know that sometimes my parents and like kind of even relatives and stuff like that, they would like do a thing of like speaking in Chinese when like they know like the other people don't understand, and it's really like, to me, kind of to be honest, I think it's kind of rude to do that, and I think they got away with it different times because they were all, they always seemed so nice, and it was always kind of like it was always friendly, something like that, and it was really never really mean spirited. But at the same time, though, it's still like just one of those things that like yeah, I get it that like, when you're speaking your native tongue, there is this kind of like secret sign language, I guess, so to speak, or secret handshake in that. But, when you're in a mixed, kind of crowd, so to speak, yeah, it's definitely just understood that like, okay, like, if you're saying something, then, make it so that everyone can understand what you're saying and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously I work in a company that's it's fairly big in international company, and there's
Right.
it's not an English speaking company, so it's interesting to see how that plays out in the business dynamic as well.
Right.
People's perceptions, what's actually being said. And I mean, you're actually right. Most of the time, it's fairly innocent, and it's more down to just the fact that it's easier and to say the complexity of all the intention of what you're trying to get across in that language than it is trying to translate it in your head. I often found that with international colleagues that over time, if you go out and you're drinking with them, there comes a point in the evening where it's just like too much effort to try and like translate everything, and they all just start talking in like their native language because it's just like, oh man, it's like 11 o'clock. I've had like, plenty to drink. I don't want to have to do that in my head anymore. So I understand that. So
yeah, I feel like sometimes also like kind of in that kind of drinking scenario, like you almost feel like you understand, even though it's not your native tongue and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's just something about this kind of, the lowering of inhibitions, then that like, like you feel like you can pick up more by osmosis, I guess, and stuff.
Yeah, well, generally the intellectual content of conversation tends to go downhill fairly fast the more people drink. So, should we go and get a burger or something like that? It's quite easy to understand in another language.
Definitely.
Things like this. So, should we go to Taco Bell, etc.? So, yeah. But I mean, it was. There were some things they definitely changed with this one. It was interesting to see that they didn't try to do. I mean, the biggest change, of course, is the Jia Chen with her Christian background. You couldn't really translate that into this version, and so they had to pretty much just make her a bit of a sort of a maid character who's hasn't had any boyfriends before. So that was obviously.
They chose Elizabeth Pena for that role too, because she's usually not like kind of really known for being like a kind of more straight laced kind of character and stuff. I mean, generally speaking and stuff like that. Like she's kind of like we talked different times about shorthand for casting and stuff. She's usually cast as somebody's a little bit more seductive. Like in The Incredibles, actually, that was kind of the character she was portraying. Like
That's right. Yes. Yeah. I remembered. Yeah.
So it's interesting how that's had like her the choice in this case and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and of course they missed the entire thing with the boyfriend who wasn't the boyfriend, so you didn't get that kind of that her character didn't have that depth that it did in the original, and certainly not the kind of the cultural sort of impact. There seemed to be more emphasis on the younger daughter in this one with sort of. The kind of slight kind of cross-cultural thing with the Brazilian guy.
Right.
Which was upside down, I guess. We just had to interpret it that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how they made commentary about like, the only Brazilians we know are Nazis or something like that. It was like kind of a weird kind of, weird comment. And it felt like overall there was more kind of, racial kind of stereotypes and kind of that kind of thing that was put into this one that we just didn't have in the original. I don't know. I feel like I'm wondering if like it was more distracting to have that, or did it really add any thing to the story and stuff.
Yeah, it felt like they just had to fill up some of the gaps that they couldn't fill with the original source material, so they tried to sort of change it up. I mean, it all felt a bit superficial. That I didn't really get any great understanding of Mexican or Cuban or culture or Brazilian culture from it. But apart from name dropping, Juan Gilberto and Astrid Gilberto and things like this in the music bit, that was about that's the only Brazilian reference we can throw into this. you know, all they needed was maybe Pele as a soccer player as well, maybe. But yeah. So I mean, yeah, it felt kind of a bit like a TV movie in that respect. It kind of lacked a bit of sort of depth. I didn't really, you know, the whole smashing of the plates and perhaps all felt very kind of tacked on, and it just felt like we need to do something to get so people don't fall asleep during this movie at that stage. It felt kind of very out of place, though. I don't know.
Yeah, it was pretty jarring. Like, although, like, I guess they kind of did it as a I don't know, their calling card, I guess, because like later on, like a later scene, whatever, the one daughter like kind of uses it like kind of make a statement and stuff. And I mean, I guess that was their, you know, quote unquote thing, so to speak. I thought it was interesting to kind of, you know, that they did. One of the main things they did copy, we didn't really talk about, was making lunch for the little girl and stuff. That was like pretty much a key element that was almost like how I feel like in both cases, in this case, you know, like kind of, you know, Martin's kind of way of like basically showing his love for like, you know, the little girl and stuff like that. And then really like just becoming more, I guess, closer to the, you know, the mother and stuff, which, you know, like kind of translated to a thing of like, you know, for both of them, you know, like we talk about secrets in the original and stuff like that. And this one, it was, you know, like, it was a secret between the daughter and him, you know, that he was making these meals for her, and he was eating the meals that the mother made and stuff. And then after like the mother found out, it was a secret between him and the mother that like, I kind of, you know, I'll keep making them and I'll keep eating it. Like, you know, that like it was a secret between them that he knew or that she knew and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was this weird sort of passing on of just, you know, if you think of secrets as dysfunctional, I suppose maybe, he was passing it on to that daughter as well, in that, you know, yeah, and I kind of, it's interesting because that also kind of played with your expectations in the original, because you kind of felt, oh, he's just like a really cool grandfather who's cooking these, but then you realize later on that he's actually putting in the extra work to make sure this little kid isn't too freaked out when the grandfather is actually like kind of the father. So, yeah, it's yeah, that was a very interesting take on that. And they also kind of left out this thing of, you know, all the kids putting in their orders with the daughter so they could get the nice food. I felt that there was just lots of little kind of incidental touches that felt quite authentic that were in the original, that were kind of left out of the remake in that respect. Yeah,
they also did keep the element of the old friend kind of you know, what's called you know, passing on and stuff like that. But here, you know, like kind of, you know, it's what's called the old, quote unquote, old friend isn't that old. You know, he's like at the most like maybe 50s, maybe like, you know, probably late 40s and stuff like that. Tragically, the actor himself actually passed away, you know, through a heart attack relatively early, 52, I think it was. So that was like a weird kind of, you know, ironic kind of, you know, life imitating art and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, they obviously so he visually looks quite a lot younger in the remake, which kind of heightens, you know, obviously the daughter's fear for her father as well, which was quite effective in a way. Yeah. But yeah, I thought that they did a good job with the remake of at least giving each daughter a fairly good identity, separating them out, and you kind of had the very hardworking business daughter and the young kind of rebellious in the music store wants to just go off backpacking, and the one who's very kind of devoted and sort of giving herself over to sort of a good cause, being the teacher. And that was actually in a way, maybe just because I'm more familiar with it, but it felt like they kind of identified those characters more. They delineated them better, I would say, in the remake. In the original, it was more, I don't know, more confusing. The youngest one wasn't quite so rebellious. in the original, where she is much more kind of rebellious and causes a bit more problems in the remake. So
yeah, I felt like the original was more focused on that the daughter who's the business person and stuff, and it's yeah, it was definitely almost like she was like in some ways the central character, or at least it felt like a transition from where like we thought the story is really around Chu and stuff like that, but it was really at least towards the end it was shifted towards her, like kind of where a lot of the things were about like kind of the complications in her life, and then her ultimate decision and stuff like that. But here, yeah, I think the in the remake they're definitely a lot more balanced. That like it's like you said, yeah, definitely we're looking at each of the other daughters and stuff like that, and like kind of what makes them tick, and like kind of, I mean, a lot of the general things are the same. We had again the kind of we talked again before about the Shakespearian aspect. The having these love letters that like were written by somebody else and stuff like that is a very Shakespearean thing and stuff. And so that's repeated here. And then like you said, the youngest daughter is definitely like given a lot more airtime in this one, and we see like kind of her starting this life with this Brazilian boyfriend and stuff like that. But she doesn't get knocked up, I guess. That's an interesting kind of thing that they didn't do in this one.
No, but they had this sort of surprise marriage.
Right.
So they kind of doubled up, because that was also what the middle daughter does as well, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I guess as well, there's some sort of thing where they look at the dynamics of what it's like to be the youngest, the eldest, and the middle sibling. Perhaps they didn't really delve into it too deeply in either one, I didn't think. But I mean, I would say what we are ignoring is, no disrespect to her, but the elephant in the room, Raquel Welch as an elderly Latino woman, which was kind of an interesting choice.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Fair play to Raquel Welch, but I mean, I think if I was Martine, I'd probably choose her over the daughter, in all fairness, because Raquel Welch is still looks great.
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point she was like in her 60s and stuff like that, but you wouldn't, you couldn't tell that. I mean, like kind of, so she's definitely one of those that's aged well, and yeah, so God bless Botox or whatever, like kind of process she has. So. But yeah, at the same time though, like I think the way that like they definitely made her less appealing was they copied, like kind of the nagging, wife's kind of thing from the original and stuff like that. So that definitely kind of made her like kind of a little bit more like nails on chalk on a chalkboard kind of thing, in terms of just different times when the things that would come out of her mouth, like kind of. So yeah, I mean, so it was interesting how like they kind of had to use that as a way to kind of make her less appealing and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, she was quite an over-the-top character as well, I suppose.
Right.
And I think that was the difference. They almost sort of had her like a pantomime dame a little bit in this version, whereas Mrs. Liang is just generally pretty irritating in the original.
Yes.
They've got that really accurate in that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed too, like having watched Shall We Dance last week and stuff like that, the thing that kind of caught my eye was when they were dancing, she was kind of backleading. Like in other words, backleading is this thing where like you're even though you're technically following, but you're kind of making the leader do certain moves and stuff like that. So that was an interesting nuance of like kind of how like she was like almost trying to take charge of kind of what was happening with Martini, until of course ultimately, as we know, didn't quite turn out that way. Then she wasn't able to backlead her way to marriage and stuff. Yeah,
no, I mean that's a very subtle nuance you picked up on there, because I'm afraid my time in dance groups is not enough, not long enough for me to appreciate that. But I mean, I think there was that shows you the level of detail they did actually think about with this. It didn't feel like a kind of a thrown together remake in some respects. I mean, you could tell the budget was very low. But I mean, there was still a lot of thought that went into the dialogue and the interactions. So it definitely had some, it was pretty decent, really, in terms of remakes.
I felt that way too. That like 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 you said, the level of detail. It was done like kind of with a lot more care and thought, and like where the food like kind of that was definitely again a key part about it that they knew would be a key part, and they definitely felt like they didn't spare any expense there.
Yeah, I think what it lacked really was it just lacked a bit more of the subtlety perhaps of the original, and there wasn't as much sort of cultural interest that they managed to sort of get across in it. And again, I didn't feel like they very cleverly, as I say earlier, with the eldest daughter in the original, even though she was quite combative, you felt like there was this real sort of strong link with the father. They didn't really manage to portray that, I don't think, with the remake as strongly. So it did sort of fall short a little bit there.
I think they kind of had the, I think in this case we suffered from like kind of the Western solution to remakes kind of thing where they felt like they had to have, this Hallmark ending right and stuff because she ends up, like kind of working in the restaurant ultimately and stuff like that. That was something that like they would never do in the original. It was just, but then, this being a Western remake, it felt almost like kind of okay, like kind of that, like, this is like the quote unquote happy ending and stuff like that.
Yeah. They want to leave it ambiguous. So, yeah.
So...
Yeah, it was interesting as well. The younger daughter's stuff, like college, it was all revolving around college for her, whether she was going to go to college or not. Right. That was the main thing. Whereas in the original, it was just like, well, she's pregnant now. Fine, done, dusted, job done. Right. So, yeah. And
that's probably to some degree like a realistic aspect of it, like kind of the culture there because, we kind of talked a little bit about how like, if you didn't, get into one of the rare university slots, you basically were going to the military, and then pretty much after that, you were going to work. I mean, that's like it, or you raise the family and stuff. It's funny how like that is like kind of what I still remember the culture, and even though that like we are now in the 21st century, I'm guessing that it's probably not that different. Although like maybe there's a few more options now for them to kind of go out of the country to like kind of maybe either start a business or go to university overseas and stuff. So that's probably the only other real options. Well, I mean, case in point, that's basically what Ann Lee did. He went to the United States and went to university there and stuff. So
yeah. So I guess which one did you prefer of the two?
Well, I think it's pretty easy, like, decision, like it even though that like the remake did a fairly good job of something like that, but it just, can't really compare to like kind of the original Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. So yeah. Hands down.
I mean, I think that's as well, that's interesting. And the title is very kind of arresting in that it really does just focus on the very bare essentials of life. And you even have him, as a main character, Chu, saying, is this all there is to life? Is just eat, drink, and sex, and that's it. Right. And I think that's what they try to portray is this, he's focused on that element of his life. He's losing out with the relationships with his daughter. So I think the message, if I could infer one, was that, it's the relationships that are real, the real value of life, and the real sort of add the flavor and spice of life that would otherwise be missing. So
absolutely. So definitely this kind of what's called we'll see more food in the upcoming weeks with our holiday pictures and stuff. Next week we'll plan on looking at Bishop's Wife, and then after that like we definitely have some different ideas, and we'll be kind of looking at possibly things such as the Grinch Who Stole Christmas and other holiday favorites. So once again, I'm John Cheng with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.